The landscape of modern entertainment is driven by an insatiable hunger for the past, a relentless collective desire to reach back into the archives of our youth and pull forward the stories that once anchored our Friday nights. In the golden age of situational comedies during the late 20th century, television was not merely a passive background distraction but a cultural hearth around which families gathered, forming deep and seemingly unbreakable emotional attachments to characters who felt less like distant actors and more like childhood friends. There was a unique, irreplaceable magic to the way these multi-camera productions captured the painstaking, beautiful, and often awkward process of growing up in real time, allowing audiences to mirror their own developmental milestones against those broadcast on screen. For an entire generation, those half-hour windows into simulated adolescent life provided comfort, guidance, and a shared vocabulary of youth that survived long after the networks pulled the plugs and the sets were dismantled. Yet, as the years stretch into decades, the pristine, brightly lit memories of those classic broadcasts often begin to clash with the complicated realities of the people who inhabited them, giving rise to an entirely new perspective on what it truly costs to create the cultural touchstones of our collective childhoods. As we peel back the layers of time, the glossy veneer of Hollywood perfection begins to crack, revealing that the stories we cherished were frequently surrounded by unseen turbulence, unspoken anxieties, and a complex web of industry dynamics that the public was never intended to see. Among the pantheon of these era-defining programs, few shows commanded the specific brand of fierce, enduring loyalty quite like the beloved ABC sitcom Boy Meets World, which entered the cultural landscape in the autumn of 1993 and remained a definitive force on television until the turn of the millennium in the year 2000. The series achieved something remarkably rare in the television industry, chronicling the evolutionary journey of its central characters from the tender, fragile age of 11 all the way through the chaotic, formative landscapes of high school and the ultimate mature precipice of college graduation. At the absolute heart of this narrative ecosystem was Corey Matthews, the relatable, slightly neurotic titular boy portrayed with an enduring everyday charm by Ben Savage, whose life served as the primary lens through which an entire generation viewed their own growing pains. Alongside him stood an unforgettable ensemble that rounded out his world, including Danielle Fishel as the fiercely intelligent, uniquely eccentric, and deeply grounded love interest, Topanga Lawrence, whose romance with Corey became an idealized blueprint for adolescent devotion. This core dynamic was profoundly enriched by Ryder Strong in the role of Sean Hunter, Corey's intensely loyal best friend from the wrong side of the tracks, whose vulnerability and complex emotional baggage added an unprecedented layer of dramatic weight to a traditional sitcom format, while Will Friedle provided brilliant, erratic comedic relief as the eccentric older brother Eric Matthews, whose evolution from a cool teenager into an absurdly lovable eccentric became a fan-favorite element of the show. Together, this tight-knit group of young performers navigated the idealized and occasionally harsh realities of adolescence under the watchful parental guidance of the legendary schoolmaster Mr. Feeney, creating an on-screen chemistry so potent and believable that millions of viewers genuinely felt as though they were growing up right alongside them in that fictionalized Philadelphia suburb. However, the reality of being a child star within the high-stakes environment of network television is a uniquely isolating experience, one that carries a heavy psychological weight that is rarely understood by those watching from the comfort of their living rooms. For 7 intense seasons, these young actors dedicated their formative years to the rigorous demands of a weekly production schedule, sacrificing normal childhood milestones for table reads, rehearsals, and the unyielding pressure of performing in front of a live studio audience while their changing bodies and evolving identities were immortalized on celluloid for global consumption. When the series finally reached its emotional conclusion at the dawn of the 21st century, the cast scattered into adulthood, carrying with them the monumental legacy of their youth and a complex mixture of gratitude and exhaustion that required years of distance to fully comprehend and process. If you are fascinated by the hidden histories of the shows that shaped your life and want to stay connected to deep, investigative lookbacks into entertainment history, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications so you never miss an episode of our ongoing journeys through television lore. It was precisely this need for reflection and a desire to re-examine their shared past from an adult perspective that led Danielle Fishel, Ryder Strong, and Will Friedle to reunite in the summer of 2022 to to launch their wildly popular independent rewatch podcast, appropriately titled Pod Meets World, a platform that immediately transformed from a simple nostalgia trip into a profoundly candid, often raw examination of the realities of their time on set. The massive success of the podcast inadvertently reopened a massive, highly contentious chapter in the extended franchise history, bringing a renewed and intensely critical focus onto the show's modern sequel series, Girl Meets World, which debuted on the Disney Channel in 2014 to a massive wave of anticipation and immediate demographic division. The revival was designed to bridge the generational gap, shifting the focus to a new generation by following the lives of Corey and Topanga's young daughter, Riley Matthews, portrayed by Rowan Blanchard, and her fiercely independent best friend, Maya Hart, played by Sabrina Carpenter, effectively attempting to recreate the foundational Corey and Sean dynamic for a contemporary audience. While the project was marketed as a joyous, celebratory homecoming that featured Danielle Fishel and Ben Savage as series regulars, alongside regular directorial and acting contributions from Ryder Strong and writing input from Will Friedle, the atmosphere behind the scenes was starkly different from the heartwarming narrative presented to the public. As the podcast hosts began to dissect their experiences, a deeply unsettling picture began to emerge regarding the environment surrounding the sequel, revealing that the transition from the 90s sitcom world to the modern landscape of children's television was fraught with systemic tension, institutional disconnects, and a profound sense of alienation that left many of the original stars feeling profoundly uncomfortable with how the new show was being managed and executed. The initial excitement of reviving these iconic characters quickly gave way to a tumultuous reality, as the creators found themselves trapped between the immense pressure to live up to a legendary legacy and the harsh, contemporary realities of a studio environment that felt alien, restrictive, and severely lacking in the collaborative joy that had defined their original run decades prior. The deep fractures and underlying systemic tensions that came to define the troubled production of the sequel series did not emerge overnight, but were instead rooted in the very manner in which the project was originally conceived, structured, and presented to the veteran cast members who had given the franchise its original heartbeat. In a series of extraordinarily candid revelations that have sent shockwaves through the dedicated fan community, original stars Will Friedle and Ryder Strong pulled back the curtain on the corporate mechanics of the revival, disclosing the deeply hurtful reality that they were entirely bypassed during the initial development phases of the project. Rather than receiving a respectful, professional phone call from the executives or the creators to discuss the potential resurrection of the characters they had spent 7 years inhabiting, both actors made the jarring discovery that the show was happening at the exact same time as the general public, learning about the existence of the sequel purely through speculative and promotional trade press articles. This fundamental lack of basic professional courtesy immediately cast a long, dark shadow over the entire enterprise, creating a profound sense of institutional alienation and making it abundantly clear that the corporate entities driving the new production viewed the legacy actors more as expandable pieces of intellectual property than as vital, creative collaborators who deserved a seat at the design table from day one. For Ryder Strong, the sudden and unexpected realization that his iconic character, Sean Hunter, was being brought back to life without his prior knowledge or consent was a deeply unsettling experience that fostered an immediate, protective skepticism toward the entire endeavor. When the production team finally did extend an official invitation for the two actors to reprise their legendary 90s characters for the Disney Channel demographic, the response from both Will Friedle and Ryder Strong was far from the enthusiastic, nostalgic compliance that network executives had likely anticipated or hoped to secure. Having successfully navigated the treacherous transition from child stardom into mature, multifaceted creative adulthood, neither performer possessed any genuine internal desire to step back in front of the multi-camera setup or slip back into the performative skin of their adolescent identities, viewing that specific chapter of their lives as a closed, beautifully preserved book. Ryder Strong has openly acknowledged that his eventual agreement to participate in the sequel series was born entirely out of a pragmatic, strategic calculation to advance his burgeoning career behind the camera rather than any lingering passion for network acting, viewing the return as an exclusive, high-profile opportunity to secure coveted directing slots and establish a serious, professional foothold in that specific quadrant of his creative life. Will Friedle mirrored this profound hesitation almost completely, explaining that his own reluctant decision to return to the character of Eric Matthews was entirely conditional, driven solely by a strict, hard-fought contractual compromise that allowed him to pen an episode of the series, thereby using his performance as leverage to advance his primary passion for screenwriting. This mutual reluctance underscores a fascinating, bittersweet disconnect at the absolute core of the revival, revealing that two of the most beloved figures of the original franchise were operating not out of a sense of joyful nostalgia, but through a deeply guarded, transactional necessity that kept them emotionally detached from the very production they were being asked to legitimize, reflecting on those turbulent years with the profound benefit of a decade's worth of hindsight. Writer Strong has formulated a compelling theory regarding why the project felt so intrinsically jarring and structurally uncomfortable for the veteran cast members during its three-season run. He has suggested that, in retrospect, the revival occurred far too early in their collective life cycles, launching at a time when the original actors were only in their early 30s and still actively fighting to establish their independent adult identities outside the monumental, suffocating shadow of their childhood television fame. Without a sufficient amount of historical distance or emotional space from the characters that had defined their youth, stepping back onto a replica of their old world felt less like a celebration and more like a regressive step backward into a past they had worked tirelessly to transcend. Strong posited that if the exact same show were to be pitched to them today, with the comforting cushion of midlife perspective and the immense wisdom that comes with age, their reaction would be radically different, characterized by an open-hearted enthusiasm and a genuine desire to be deeply involved in guiding the next generation. Despite the lingering professional frustrations and the systemic mismanagement that plagued their involvement, both Friedle and Strong have made a deliberate, concerted point to separate their critiques of the production environment from the actual performances of the young actors who stood at the center of the storm, issuing immense, unreserved praise for the raw talent, work ethic, and remarkable resilience demonstrated by Rowan Blanchard and Sabrina Carpenter under immensely difficult circumstances, while her male co-stars were left to discover the project through the media. Danielle Fishel's path into the sequel was entirely different, though no less complicated or fraught with a profound sense of underlying professional manipulation. As a core anchor of the proposed series, Fishel did receive an official phone call from the production team, but the timing of the pitch collided directly with a major, life-altering personal milestone that she had just achieved after years of hard work outside the entertainment industry. Literally within the exact same week that the network reached out to pitch the concept of the revival, Fishel had been formally accepted into Chapman University to pursue her highly coveted master's degree, a rigorous academic pursuit designed to transition her into a completely new career as a licensed marriage and family therapist. Faced with an agonizing choice between an authentic, hard-won path toward psychological practice and the alluring, familiar pull of her Hollywood past, she was heavily assured by producers that the project was in its absolute infancy, an early-stage concept that would afford her ample time to wrap her brain around the logistics and balance her commitments. In reality, Fishel later discovered that the machinery of the show was significantly farther along in active production and corporate development than she had been led to believe, a realization that left her feeling subtly misled and structurally cornered into a massive commitment that completely derailed her therapeutic aspirations. Furthermore, she found herself grappling with immediate, profound narrative skepticism regarding the chronological plausibility of the premise itself, questioning how she and Ben Savage could possibly be old enough to realistically parent a fast-talking teenage daughter, a creative concern that highlighted the rushed, commercial nature of the entire revival strategy. The deep-seated issues surrounding the modern franchise culminated in a series of shocking revelations that forever changed how audiences view the environment behind both series. The most disturbing aspect of this behind-the-scenes history came to light when veteran television producer Frank Pace candidly shared his experiences during a public industry panel. According to industry reports, Pace recounted a devastating moment from the very first table read of the sequel series, a moment that Danielle Fishel had completely blocked from her memory due to its sheer emotional intensity. During this introductory session, the powerful showrunner Michael Jacobs reportedly launched into a harsh, unyielding tirade against the incredibly young and vulnerable cast members. Sabrina Carpenter was only 13 years old at the time, and Rowan Blanchard was a mere 11, yet they were subjected to intense corporate pressure right out of the gate. Jacobs allegedly berated the young girls, aggressively asserting that their initial performances did not live up to the lofty cultural traditions or the high creative standards set by the original 90s sitcom decades prior. This severe, unexpected public criticism left both childhood actresses in tears, setting a profoundly negative, stressful tone for the entire production and exposing the dark reality of navigating the high-stakes world of children's television under a highly demanding and volatile showrunner. This distressing revelation perfectly aligned with a broader pattern of problematic behavior that the original cast had begun to openly address during their public promotions. Writer Strong took a definitive, uncompromising stance regarding his relationship with the powerful showrunner, stating publicly that while he owes a great deal of his early career success and industry knowledge to Jacobs, he ultimately reached a point where he needed to completely cut the creator out of his life. Strong made it clear that he could no longer condone or excuse behavior that crossed the line into emotional distress, prioritizing his personal integrity and the well-being of young performers over old industry loyalties. Danielle Fishel also found herself in direct, frequent conflict with the showrunner throughout the run of the sequel, specifically fighting for the emotional integrity of the storyline. Having lived through the 90s as a young girl whose character's entire identity was frequently defined by her romantic relationship, Fishel was deeply determined to ensure that the new series focused heavily on the power of female friendship rather than teenage romance. She strongly believed that teaching young girls to value themselves exclusively through the lens of romance was a terrible, counterproductive lesson that did not serve their long-term development, although the showrunner initially assured her that the central focus of the narrative would remain on the strong bond between the characters played by Sabrina Carpenter and Rowan Blanchard. Fishel was deeply disappointed to see the script formatting quickly revert to traditional, romance-driven tropes. Gathering her courage after years in the industry, she began to vocally push back, directly confronting the showrunner and demanding that the creative integrity of the young female leads be respected. This bold resistance did not go over well with the established power structure on set, creating an incredibly tumultuous, frosty environment that made her time on the series deeply unpleasant and emotionally draining. The lingering trauma and creative frustration from this era created a fascinating, highly visible rift among the three podcast hosts during a live, unscripted broadcast of their show. When writer Strong and Will Friedle unexpectedly suggested that their successful podcast should naturally transition into a comprehensive rewatch of the sequel series once they finished reviewing the original show, Fishel reacted with genuine, deep-seated frustration. She admitted on mic that the mere suggestion made her a little mad, bluntly reiterating that she had absolutely no desire to relive those difficult years or analyze a production that had caused so much internal distress, while Friedle and Strong jokingly argued that continuing on to the sequel series made practical sense and represented an easy, built-in extension of their current content platform. Fishel adamantly countered that the sequel was fundamentally not their show. Strong quickly pointed out the complex irony of the situation, reminding her that she was physically present on that difficult set every single day as a main star, while he himself had dedicated significant creative energy to directing 18 full episodes of the program. This intense, unresolved debate left the future of their joint media venture completely up in the air, with no official confirmation as to whether they will ever actually cross that generational bridge or leave the franchise behind for good. Amidst these heavy systemic critiques, writer Strong did offer a small, comforting silver lining regarding the ultimate creative trajectory of his own iconic character, Sean Hunter. Despite his profound reservations about the toxic studio environment and the corporate mismanagement, Strong expressed sincere gratitude that the writers ultimately granted Sean a beautifully redemptive, happy ending. Within the narrative of the sequel, the historically troubled, transient character finally finds stability, falling deeply in love with Maya's mother, Katie, marrying her in a beautiful ceremony, and officially adopting Maya as his own daughter. For a character who spent the entirety of the 90s dealing with abandonment, poverty, and intense emotional isolation, this specific narrative resolution felt like a wonderful, deeply deserved full-circle moment that honored his long journey. Ultimately, the complex, bittersweet legacy of these two interconnected television shows serves as a powerful, cautionary reminder of the hidden human cost that often funds our collective cultural nostalgia. As the young actors of both generations continue to forge their own paths into adulthood, with Sabrina Carpenter transforming into a global pop superstar and Rowan Blanchard pursuing independent artistic expressions, the true story of their shared origin remains a testament to resilience. The glittering, idealized world of television will always hold a special, comforting place in the hearts of millions of viewers worldwide. But the raw, honest testimonies of the people who actually built those worlds remind us to look closer. Behind every perfect, heartwarming family moment broadcast into our living rooms lies a deeply complex human reality, full of creative battles, personal sacrifices, and the enduring strength of artists who refuse to let the industry break their spirits. As always, the conversation surrounding these beloved cultural touchstones continues to evolve, leaving audiences to weigh the joy of the fiction